Welcome to Boring Travel and Geography for Sleep, and to our slow-moving, fact-filled series about every country in the world. Tonight's episode is about Honduras, a country that you may or may not have thought much about lately, but which we are now going to explore in great and gentle detail. Not because it's exciting, but because you're here and we're here, and that's really all it takes to begin. Now, as always, a little disclaimer before we get started. We do our best to present accurate information in these episodes, but small errors might sneak their way in. If you notice something that's wrong or slightly off, feel free to comment below so we can correct it. Especially if you are from Honduras, have traveled there, or know a lot about the country. We'd love to hear your insights. It's always interesting to learn more, even when the topic is intentionally boring. So settle in. Let your body relax. Maybe close your eyes if you want to. This is not the kind of travel that demands anything from you. You don't have to pack a bag, board a flight, or memorize a single fact. Just drift along with the slow current of geography and let us gently lull you into knowledge or sleep. Location, borders, and size. Honduras is a country located in the region known as Central America, which itself is a narrow isthmus that connects the large landmass of North America to the vast southern continent of South America. This part of the world often gets referred to as part of North America, geographically speaking, even though its cultural and historical identity is more closely tied to Latin America. Honduras lies almost exactly in the middle of this narrow strip of land. It faces the Caribbean Sea to the north and east, and has a small stretch of coastline on the Pacific Ocean to the south, at the Gulf of Fonseca. That means Honduras is not landlocked. It has coastlines on two different bodies of water, something not many countries in the world can say. The Caribbean side is much longer and far more dominant in terms of geography, stretching out with humid lowlands, coral reefs, and tropical ports. The Pacific side, on the other hand, is short and tucked between its two southern neighbors, giving the country a narrow but strategic access to that ocean as well. Honduras shares borders with three other countries. To the west, it borders Guatemala. To the southwest, it meets El Salvador. And to the south and southeast, it shares a long boundary with Nicaragua. The border with Nicaragua is by far the longest, stretching across mountains and rivers and valleys. The shortest border is the one with El Salvador. These neighboring countries all form part of the Central American community, and while they each have distinct identities, their histories, landscapes, and social fabrics are deeply interconnected. In terms of total area, Honduras is not among the world's largest countries, but it's not particularly small either. It covers about 112,000 square kilometers, or roughly 43,000 square miles, placing it somewhere around the 100th place in the global size rankings, depending on how you count. That makes it slightly larger than countries like Bulgaria or South Korea, but smaller than places like Greece or Iceland if you add in all their ocean territories. It's a mid-sized country by global standards, but relatively large within Central America. Most of the country is mountainous, with wide inland valleys and highlands forming the bulk of the interior. The lowlands are concentrated along the coasts, particularly on the northern Caribbean side, where the terrain flattens out toward the sea. These geographic features play a central role in everything from climate and agriculture to infrastructure and population patterns, which we'll get back to a bit later. But for now, what you need to know is simply this. Honduras is a country with mountains in the middle, ocean on both sides, and neighbors on three borders. It sits quietly in the middle of Central America, shaped by ridges, rivers, and coastlines that mark its place on the map. Names, heights, and waters. The full official name of the country is República de Honduras, or in English, the Republic of Honduras. The word Honduras itself is Spanish and means depths or deep waters. According to one version of the story, it was the famous explorer Christopher Columbus who first used this term, supposedly remarking on the deep waters off the coast during one of his voyages. Whether this is historically accurate or not is difficult to say with certainty, but the name stuck, and the country has been known as Honduras ever since. It's one of those poetic-sounding names that, like many others in the region, is rooted in the impressions of early European explorers rather than the local languages or place names used by the people who already lived there. When it comes to height, Honduras has its fair share of mountains. In fact, much of the interior is hilly or mountainous terrain, but one peak stands out from the rest. The highest point in the country is called Cerro Las Minas, also known as Salac, which reaches up to about 2,870 meters above sea level. That's roughly 9,416 feet. This peak is part of the Salac National Park, and the name Salac is believed to come from a local Lenca word meaning box of water, because the mountain is a source for many rivers. The climate near the summit is cool and cloud-shrouded, in contrast to the tropical heat found at lower altitudes. As for the lowest point, that's a bit simpler to pinpoint. Like many countries with a coastline, Honduras's lowest elevation is at sea level, where land meets ocean. That includes both the Caribbean and the Pacific coasts, but especially the flat and humid northern coast, where much of the country's economic activity and port infrastructure is concentrated. Water plays an important role in the geography of Honduras, not just along its shores but also inland. The country's longest river is the Rio Patuca, which winds its way from the Central Highlands and eventually empties into the Caribbean Sea. It's one of the longest rivers in Central America and flows through rainforest and remote areas, shaping both the environment and the livelihoods of people living nearby. The river is known for its powerful current and seasonal flooding, and while it isn't heavily navigated, it remains a vital part of the country's hydrological system. When it comes to lakes, Honduras does not have many large ones, but there is one that stands out. Lake Ulloa, located in the western part of the country, is the largest natural lake in Honduras. It covers an area of about 79 square kilometers, so it's not huge by international standards, but it is significant locally. The lake sits in a volcanic depression and is surrounded by mountains, forests, and a rich diversity of birdlife. It's also a popular domestic tourist destination, known for its calm waters and fish restaurants along the shoreline. While it might not appear on every world map, Lake Ulloa holds an important place in the geography and culture of Honduras. So to summarize quietly before moving on, Honduras is a land named after deep waters, shaped by high peaks and wide valleys. Its highest mountain is cool and misty. Its lowest point is where the sea softly laps the coast, and in between flow rivers and lakes that carve their way through the land like long, slow-moving stories in a tropical setting. Independence, flag, and language. Like many other countries in the Americas, Honduras was once part of the vast Spanish Empire. It remained under Spanish colonial rule for nearly 3 centuries, from the early 1500s until the early 1800s. The country eventually gained its independence on the 15th of September in the year 1821. This was the same day as several of its Central American neighbors, Guatemala, El Salvador, Nicaragua, and Costa Rica, since they were all part of a joint declaration of independence from Spain. So, although Honduras became an independent nation, it did so at the same time and in coordination with others in the region, reflecting their shared colonial history and geographic proximity. After independence, Honduras briefly joined several political unions, including the short-lived Federal Republic of Central America. But that too dissolved, and Honduras eventually settled into being its own republic, though not without periods of political instability and shifting alliances, which we'll come back to later in the history section. The flag of Honduras is simple but meaningful. It features 3 horizontal stripes, 2 blue stripes at the top and bottom, and a white stripe in the center. In the middle of the white stripe, there are 5 small blue stars arranged in an X pattern. These stars represent the 5 original member states of the former Federal Republic of Central America, and the central star symbolizes Honduras itself. The blue stripes are said to represent the Pacific Ocean and the Caribbean Sea, the 2 bodies of water that flank Central America. The white symbolizes peace and prosperity. It's a flag with regional symbolism, quietly expressing a hope for unity among the Central American nations. The current version of the flag has been in use since the late 19th century, and although minor adjustments have occurred over time, the core design and meaning have remained steady. When it comes to language, the official and dominant language in Honduras is Spanish. This is a direct result of its colonial history, and Spanish is spoken by the vast majority of the population. However, it is not the only language used in the country. Along the Caribbean coast, and especially on the Bay Islands, you will hear English and English-based Creoles spoken by Afro-Caribbean communities, such as the Garífuna people. In addition, several indigenous languages are still in use in parts of the country, though these are spoken by smaller populations and are often under pressure from the dominance of Spanish. Some of the indigenous languages include Mosquito, Lenca, and Chordy, each with deep cultural roots. So, while Spanish is the official language and the language of government, media, and education, Honduras is home to a range of linguistic traditions, especially among its indigenous and Afro-Caribbean communities. It's not a country with formal bilingualism, like some others in the region, but the linguistic landscape is still more varied than it might appear at first glance. As you begin to settle further into this slow drift through the facts, you can picture a country that gently emerged from colonial rule, with a flag that remembers its regional siblings and a language landscape shaped by conquest, heritage, and geography. It's not loud. It's not flashy, but it's there, quietly present in every conversation and every corner of daily life in Honduras. Population, religion, and people. As of the most recent estimates, the population of Honduras is a little over 10 million people. That puts it somewhere in the middle of the global population rankings, neither among the most populous nations nor among the smallest. To give a sense of scale, Honduras has a population roughly comparable to countries like Sweden, the Czech Republic, or Portugal. In the regional context of Central America, it's one of the larger countries in terms of population, although still smaller than Guatemala and far behind the population giants of Latin America like Mexico and Brazil. The population of Honduras has been steadily increasing over the past decades, although the growth rate has slowed somewhat in recent years. Like in many parts of the world, there has been a gradual shift from rural to urban living, and from high birth rates toward more moderate family sizes. But overall, Honduras still has a relatively young population, with a large portion under the age of 25. This means that the country has a demographic structure that brings both opportunities and challenges. Young people can bring energy and potential, but also require education, employment, and infrastructure that can keep up with their needs. When it comes to religion, Honduras is primarily a Christian country, and for much of its history it was overwhelmingly Roman Catholic, due to the influence of Spanish colonization. However, in recent decades there has been a noticeable growth in Protestant denominations, particularly evangelical and Pentecostal groups. Today, it is estimated that the country is roughly split, with a little over half of the population identifying as Catholic and a large and growing minority identifying as Protestant. There is no official state religion, and the Constitution guarantees freedom of religion, but Christianity remains deeply embedded in both private life and public ceremonies. As for the demonym, the term used to describe someone from Honduras. The word is Honduran in English. In Spanish, the word is Hondurino for men and Hondurina for women. It's not one of the more irregular demonyms in the world, and is fairly intuitive once you know it. Ethnically, the population of Honduras is diverse, though with clear majorities. The largest group is the mestizo population, people of mixed European and indigenous ancestry, which makes up the overwhelming majority of the population, often cited as around 90%. There are also several smaller but significant ethnic groups. These include the Garífuna, an Afro-Indigenous people living primarily along the Caribbean coast, with their own language and culture rooted in both African and Caribbean heritage. The Mosquito people live in the eastern lowlands and coastal areas, often in relatively remote communities. Other indigenous groups include the Lenca, Siachordi, Talyapan, and Pesh, each with their own languages and traditions, though many are now at risk of being lost. There is also a small but notable Arab Honduran community, primarily of Palestinian and Lebanese origin, who have had a visible role in business and commerce. These communities arrived during the late 19th and early 20th centuries and have since become integrated into urban life, especially in cities like San Pedro Sula. So to quietly recap, Honduras is a country of over 10 million people, mostly young, mostly mestizo, and mostly Christian. But within that majority are layers of cultural, linguistic, and religious diversity that reflect the country's complex past and evolving present. People speak Spanish, live across a varied terrain, and identify as Hondurans, some from coastal fishing villages, some from inland mountain towns, and some from rapidly growing urban centers. The fabric is more textured than it might appear on a simple demographic chart. It is layered like so many countries are, with history woven into identity. Capital, cities, and government. The capital of Honduras is a city with a long name and a long history. It is called Tegucigalpa, a word that may take a few attempts to pronounce if you're encountering it for the first time. Locals often shorten it to just Tegus. The full official name of the capital is actually Tegucigalpa and Comiaguela, because the city technically consists of two historically distinct urban areas located on opposite sides of a river, now unified under one municipal government. Tegucigalpa is situated in the southern central part of the country, nestled in a valley surrounded by hills and mountains. The elevation here is quite high, around 990 meters, or about 3,250 feet above sea level, which gives the city a relatively mild climate compared to the hotter coastal regions. It is not a coastal city, and reaching the ocean from the capital involves a long drive over winding mountain roads. The population of the capital metropolitan area is estimated at around 1.2 million people, making it the largest urban center in the country, though not by an overwhelming margin. Another major city, San Pedro Sula, located in the northwestern part of Honduras, is not far behind in population and economic importance. In fact, San Pedro Sula is often referred to as the industrial and commercial heart of the country. It's closer to the Caribbean coast and has better access to ports, highways, and infrastructure, which makes it more connected to international trade. Other significant cities include La Ceiba, a port town on the northern coast known for its tourism and access to nearby islands, and Choloma, a fast-growing city near San Pedro Sula that has become an industrial hub. There is also El Progreso, Puerto Cortés, and Comiagua, each with their own local significance and historical backgrounds. While the capital holds administrative power, the country's urban development is spread across several key regions, reflecting its mountainous geography and historical trade routes. Honduras is governed as a republic, meaning it has an elected president, a national congress, and a constitution that outlines the functions of the state. The government is divided into executive, legislative, and judicial branches, much like in many other democracies. The president serves as both the head of state and head of government and is elected by popular vote. As of the time of this episode, the president of Honduras is Xiomara Castro, who assumed office in early 2022. She is the first female president in the country's history and represents the Libre Party, a political group that leans to the left of the political spectrum. Her presidency marks a notable shift in the political landscape of Honduras, which has been shaped in recent decades by issues such as corruption, economic inequality, migration, and public security. Before becoming president, she was known partly through her connection to former President Manuel Zelaya, her husband, who was ousted in a 2009 coup, a topic we'll revisit in the historical section. In terms of international relations, Honduras is a member of several global and regional organizations. It is part of the United Nations, the Organization of American States, the Central American Integration System, and CELAC, among others. It has also maintained close, though sometimes complicated, ties with countries like the United States, especially when it comes to trade, migration, and development aid. So, to summarize in the usual quiet tone, the capital is high in the mountains, the cities are spread across valleys and coasts, and the government is democratic in structure, if not always in smooth operation. The people elect their leaders, the Constitution outlines the rules, and the country sits among many others at international meetings, trying to find its voice in a complex and crowded world. Numbers and indexes. Let's now turn to the numbers that describe life in Honduras. Those statistics and indexes that quietly tell a story about how people live, how long they live, and how well the country is doing in comparison with others. We begin with life expectancy. In Honduras, the average life expectancy is about 74 years. That means most people can expect to live into their 70s, though of course this number varies depending on many factors like location, income, and access to healthcare. In global terms, Honduras falls somewhere in the middle range, behind countries like Norway or Japan, where life expectancy exceeds 80, but ahead of many lower-income countries. It ranks roughly in the 100s globally, though the exact spot shifts depending on the data source and year. When it comes to gross domestic product, or GDP, Honduras is considered a lower middle-income country. Its GDP per capita is relatively modest, just a few thousand US per person per year when averaged out. The country ranks fairly low on the global GDP list, often grouped with other nations facing developmental challenges. The economy is a mix of agriculture, manufacturing, and services, with agriculture playing a larger role than in many more industrialized nations. Honduras earns a significant portion of its income through remittances, money sent back by Hondurans living abroad, especially in the United States. In fact, remittances make up more than 20% of the country's GDP, making them one of the most important sources of income nationwide. This reflects not only economic dependency, but also the large-scale migration that has shaped Honduran society in recent decades. Other key exports include coffee, bananas, palm oil, seafood, and textiles. The country has long been associated with the term banana republic, a phrase that originally described economies dominated by the export of a single agricultural product and foreign corporations. While Honduras has diversified somewhat, agriculture remains important, especially in rural areas. In terms of the Human Development Index, or HDI, Honduras is again in the lower middle section of the global rankings. It usually falls between place 130 and 140 out of nearly 200 countries, depending on the year and exact measurement. The HDI takes into account not just income, but also education and health, offering a broader picture of well-being. The relatively low ranking reflects a combination of factors: poverty, inequality, limited access to education, and health infrastructure that is often overburdened, especially in rural zones. At the same time, it's worth noting that Honduras has made progress in areas like childhood vaccination and literacy. There are programs in place to improve access to schooling and healthcare, and urban areas often have services that meet basic standards. Still, many challenges remain, especially when it comes to safety, employment opportunities, and public trust in government institutions. And speaking of what people are interested in, let's take a moment to ask, what do people usually Google about Honduras? Among the most common searches are things like, is Honduras safe to visit? Honduras travel requirements, Honduras beaches, Honduras flag meaning, and why are people leaving Honduras? These questions reveal a mix of curiosity, concern, and personal connection. Typical of countries that are both underrepresented in global media and affected by migration trends. So, when seen through numbers, Honduras is a country of contrast. The numbers tell of a place with rich natural resources, a young and growing population, and a strong sense of identity, but also one that faces persistent struggles with poverty, inequality, and development. These challenges don't always show up on postcards, but they are real, and they shape the daily lives of millions of Hondurans. Ancient civilizations and pre-Columbian times. Long before there was a country called Honduras, and long before the Spanish arrived with ships and steel, this region was home to thriving indigenous civilizations. Some of the earliest signs of human habitation in what is now Honduras date back thousands of years, to early hunter-gatherer societies that slowly transitioned to more settled agricultural life. Over time, the area became part of the broader Mesoamerican cultural sphere, which included the Maya, the Olmecs, and other pre-Columbian civilizations that stretched across present-day Mexico, Guatemala, El Salvador, and beyond. In western Honduras, traces of Maya civilization are especially strong. The most famous and significant archaeological site from this period is Copán. Copán was a major Maya city, and today it stands as one of the most impressive pre-Columbian ruins in Central America. Located near the Guatemalan border, Copán reached its peak between the 5th and 9th centuries CE, during the height of the classic Maya period. The city was known for its elaborate stone sculptures, towering stelae, complex hieroglyphic inscriptions, and ceremonial plazas. It was not the largest Maya city, but it was culturally important, especially as a center of art, astronomy, and governance. The so-called hieroglyphic stairway at Copán contains the longest known Maya text, carved into hundreds of stone steps, a silent and intricate record of dynastic history. While the Maya were concentrated in the western parts of what is now Honduras, other indigenous groups lived elsewhere across the territory. The Lenca people inhabited much of the central and southern highlands, with their own languages, beliefs, and traditions. In the east, along the Mosquito coast, were the Pesh, Tawaka, and other groups. Far from being a single unified culture, pre-Columbian Honduras was home to many different peoples, each with distinct ways of life, adapted to their environments, mountains, valleys, rivers, and coasts. These groups practiced agriculture, particularly the cultivation of maize, beans, squash, and chili peppers. They hunted and fished, traded across long distances, and created religious and social systems that were rich in symbolism and complexity. While most of what we know about the Maya comes from stone inscriptions and later colonial accounts, much of the history of non-Maya peoples survives through oral tradition, archaeological research, and the continued presence of their descendants. By the time the Spanish arrived in the early 1500s, Copán had already been abandoned for several centuries. Its stone monuments had become overgrown by forest, slowly crumbling in silence. But the people in the region, though fewer in number and less urbanized than before, still lived in settlements, practice their customs, and organize themselves in local chieftaincies and tribal networks. They had no idea what was coming. So, before the sound of Spanish horses and steel broke the world they knew, Honduras was already ancient. Its lands had been walked and worked and worshipped for centuries. The rivers had names, the hills had stories, and the people who lived there saw themselves not as part of a future country, but as members of clans, lineages, and worlds that ran deeper than any national border. Conquest, colonization, and independence. When the Spanish arrived in the early 16th century, they were not met with empty land, but with resistance. In 1502, during his fourth and final voyage, Christopher Columbus made landfall along the northern coast of what is now Honduras. This was the first recorded European contact with the region. But it would take a few more decades before the area came under full colonial control. The real push for conquest began around the 1520s, led by Spanish explorers and soldiers such as Gil González de Vila, Cristobal de Olid, and later Pedro de Alvarado. These men were part of the broader wave of conquest that swept through Central America after the fall of the Aztec Empire. Alvarado, who played a leading role in the conquest of Guatemala, also campaigned in Honduras, often using brutal methods to subdue the indigenous populations. The Spanish encountered stiff resistance, especially from the Lenca people in the interior highlands. One of the most famous indigenous leaders during this time was Lempira, a Lenca chieftain who organized a rebellion against the Spanish in the 1530s. According to tradition, he united many groups in an effort to expel the invaders and fought bravely until he was betrayed and killed. Today, Lempira is remembered as a national hero in Honduras. His name graces both a department and the national currency. His resistance is one of the few recorded moments where indigenous Hondurans are remembered by name. Despite resistance, the Spanish eventually established control and began organizing the territory into colonial administrative units. Towns were founded, land was claimed, and the encomienda system was introduced, giving Spanish settlers the right to extract labor and tribute from the indigenous population. In practice, this meant forced labor, often in harsh conditions, particularly in gold and silver mines. Many indigenous people died from overwork, disease, or displacement, and the population declined rapidly. Over time, Spanish settlers also introduced Catholicism, the Spanish language, and European systems of governance. The colonial economy relied on agriculture and mining, with many indigenous people living in reduced conditions or being pushed into remote areas. The region became part of the Captaincy General of Guatemala, a subdivision of the Spanish Empire that administered much of Central America from its seat in what is now Guatemala City. Unlike some other colonies, Honduras never became especially wealthy or central to Spanish interests. Its mines were productive but not vast, and its geography, mountainous, scattered, and with a rugged coastline, made communication and development difficult. This peripheral position meant that Honduras remained relatively poor and underdeveloped throughout the colonial period. In the early 1800s, however, the winds of independence began to sweep across Latin America. Inspired by the revolutions in North America and France, and stirred by the weakening of Spain during the Napoleonic Wars, independence movements began forming. On September 15, 1821, the provinces of Central America declared their independence from Spain. Honduras was among them. At first, the newly independent regions joined together in the Federal Republic of Central America, hoping to form a unified regional state. But the union was short-lived, marred by internal conflicts, regional rivalries, and weak institutions. By the late 1830s, the federation collapsed and Honduras became an independent republic in its own right, though independence did not bring immediate peace or prosperity. So, to review quietly, conquest came with violence, colonization came with hierarchy, and independence came with hope, but also confusion. Through it all, Honduras remained a place shaped from above and below, by those who ruled from distant capitals and those who tilled the land under the sun. The name of Lempira echoes through the centuries, while the legacies of colonization linger still, in language, religion, and the very lines drawn across the map. 19th and 20th century history. After gaining independence in the 1820s and seeing the collapse of the short-lived Federal Republic of Central America, Honduras entered the 19th century as a newly sovereign nation. But it was not a peaceful beginning. The decades that followed were marked by political instability, civil war, and the difficult process of state building in a country with limited infrastructure, weak institutions, and deeply divided elites. One of the most persistent themes of 19th century Honduran history was the struggle between liberals and conservatives. These ideological camps, familiar across Latin America, clashed repeatedly over the role of the church, the nature of land ownership, and the structure of government. Liberals favored secularization and reform, while conservatives sought to preserve traditional institutions and alliances. These disagreements were not only political, they often became violent, with rival factions battling for control through coups, uprisings, and shifting allegiances. Honduras experienced numerous changes in leadership during this period, sometimes going through several presidents in a single year. The country also faced frequent interventions from outside powers, particularly from neighboring countries like Guatemala, El Salvador, and Nicaragua, as regional conflicts spilled across borders. These wars were often fought over vague ideals or fleeting alliances, but they left lasting scars on the population and economy. In the late 19th century, a new force began to shape Honduran politics and economy, not local generals or foreign armies, but foreign fruit companies. With its fertile lowlands and tropical climate, Honduras became a key site for banana cultivation, and U.S.-based companies like the United Fruit Company and the Standard Fruit Company began investing heavily in land, railroads, and ports. While this brought some development, roads, jobs, and limited economic growth, it also created deep dependencies. These companies acquired vast tracts of land, often with the support of compliant governments, and became powerful players in national politics. The term Banana Republic, which originated as a description of Honduras, refers to a country whose economy and politics are dominated by a single export commodity and foreign interests. In return for infrastructure investment, fruit companies often demanded legal exemptions, tax breaks, and political influence. Their presence helped shape a pattern of governance that was often more responsive to corporate needs than to public ones. In the 20th century, this dynamic persisted and even intensified. Military coups were frequent. In fact, much of Honduran political history during the 1900s is a long series of governments, some elected, many not, replaced by military interventions, uprisings, or sudden changes in loyalty. Civilian rule was often the exception rather than the norm. Still, there were efforts at reform. In the 1950s, for instance, labor movements gained momentum, leading to the country's first major general strike in 1954, particularly among banana workers. The strike led to some modest improvements in labor conditions and drew attention to the imbalance of power between multinational corporations and Honduran citizens. But systemic change came slowly. During the Cold War, Honduras became a quiet staging ground for U.S. interests in the region. The country was seen as a strategic ally against the rise of leftist governments and guerrilla movements in neighboring countries like Nicaragua and El Salvador. The U.S. provided military aid, supported the Honduran army, and even trained foreign rebel groups, most famously the Contras, who fought against the Sandinista government in Nicaragua. Much of this activity was hidden from the public and conducted through covert operations, but its effects were widespread. Honduras became a heavily militarized state, with the army playing a central role not just in defense, but in everyday politics. By the 1980s, pressure for democratization was growing. In 1982, Honduras adopted a new constitution and began the process of returning to civilian rule. But challenges remained: poverty, inequality, corruption, and the long shadow of military influence made the transition fragile. And yet, through all of this, the country endured. Governments came and went, companies expanded and retreated, but the people continued to live their lives, raising families, planting crops, moving to cities, or leaving the country altogether in search of better opportunities. So the 19th and 20th centuries in Honduras were not defined by a single narrative, but by a long and uneven journey through independence, interference, economic dependency, military rule, and slow democratic reform. The echoes of these centuries are still felt today, in the institutions that struggle, in the patterns of migration, and in the memory of banana plantations and generals in mirrored sunglasses. Contemporary history. The beginning of the 21st century brought new hopes for Honduras. The country had transitioned, at least formally, to a civilian democracy. Elections were being held on schedule, and international observers were cautiously optimistic. But beneath the surface, many of the old issues remained: corruption, inequality, and weak state institutions continued to undermine progress. One of the most significant political events in modern Honduran history occurred in 2009. At the time, the country's president was Manuel Zelaya, a populist-leaning leader who had been elected in 2005. During his presidency, Zelaya began to shift politically, moving closer to the left-wing governments in Latin America, particularly Venezuela under Hugo Chavez. He proposed a referendum that critics claimed was aimed at changing the constitution to allow for his re-election, though the full intent remains disputed. What is not disputed is what happened next. In June 2009, the military arrested Zelaya and forcibly removed him from the country, flying him to Costa Rica in his pajamas. This act was widely condemned by international organizations, including the United Nations and the Organization of American States, and it triggered a political crisis. Supporters called it a coup d'état. Others justified it as a constitutional defense. Regardless of terminology, it exposed the fragility of Honduran democracy. The aftermath was turbulent. Protests erupted. Interim governments struggled for legitimacy. International aid was briefly suspended. Eventually, new elections were held, and Porfirio Lobo was elected president in 2010. But the wounds left by the crisis never fully healed. Trust in government declined, and political polarization deepened. In the years that followed, Honduras faced a series of compounding challenges. One of the most serious has been violence. For much of the 2010s, Honduras had one of the highest homicide rates in the world, driven by a complex mix of organized crime, drug trafficking, gang activity, and weak law enforcement. Gangs like MS-13 and Barrio 18 wielded significant power, particularly in urban areas, where they extorted businesses, recruited young people, and clashed violently with rivals. Many Hondurans chose to leave. Waves of migration to the United States increased, often including entire families or unaccompanied minors. Caravans of migrants, sometimes thousands at a time, gained international attention as they traveled north in search of safety, employment, and dignity. For many, the choice to leave was not about hope but survival. Despite these hardships, there have been efforts at reform. Civil society organizations have campaigned for greater transparency and human rights. International pressure led to the creation of anti-corruption bodies, such as MACSE, a mission supported by the Organization of American States. This mission worked with local prosecutors to investigate high-level corruption cases, though it was eventually shut down under political pressure. Elections continued, and in 2017, Juan Orlando Hernández was re-elected as president under controversial circumstances. His re-election was permitted by a court ruling that overturned the ban on consecutive terms, the very kind of move his predecessor was accused of attempting. Protests erupted, some of them violent. International observers questioned the fairness of the vote. Still, Hernández remained in power until 2022. Then, in a historic shift, Xiomara Castro, the wife of former President Zelaya, won the presidency in democratic elections. She took office in January 2022, becoming the first woman to serve as president of Honduras. Her election marked a symbolic return for the political movement that had been ousted more than a decade earlier. It also reflected a broader demand for change, though the road ahead remains uncertain. Today, Honduras continues to grapple with familiar challenges: violence, corruption, poverty, and a fragile justice system. But it also shows signs of resilience. Communities organize. Voters return to the polls. Artists and writers find ways to express the country's soul. And ordinary people, despite everything, continue their daily lives, quietly shaping the future of a nation that has never had an easy path. So the story of contemporary Honduras is not one of resolution, but of continuation. The names change, but the questions remain. How do you build a just society after centuries of outside control, internal conflict, and economic dependency? How do you protect institutions in a world where power often bends the rules? How do you keep going when the headlines are harsh but the morning still comes? These are questions without quick answers. But Honduras keeps asking them, day by day. Climate and geography. Honduras is a country shaped by mountains and coastlines. If you were to fly over it slowly from one sea to the other, you'd see a landscape of folded hills, narrow valleys, winding rivers, and humid flatlands. There is no vast central plain or sweeping desert. Instead, there's terrain that rises and falls like an uneven blanket draped across the spine of Central America. The country's geography divides naturally into three main zones. First, there is the mountainous interior. This makes up most of the land area. These mountains are not dramatic, like the Andes or the Alps, but they are persistent. Rolling ranges and misty ridges stretch across the middle of the country, dotted with pine forests, coffee farms, and quiet towns. Many of the largest cities, including the capital, Tegucigalpa, are nestled in highland basins. Second, there is the Caribbean coast, also known as the Northern Lowlands. This region is hot, humid, and tropical, with swamps, lagoons, banana plantations, and stretches of sandy beaches. The port cities here, like La Ceiba and Puerto Cortés, connect Honduras to global shipping routes. Off the coast lie the Bay Islands, a group of small islands surrounded by coral reefs and warm waters. These islands are both tourist destinations and home to communities with unique cultural identities. Third, there is the Pacific lowland region in the far south. It is much smaller in size and stretches around the Gulf of Fonseca. Here, the climate is dry and hot for much of the year. It's a region of fishing villages, mangroves, and access to the Pacific Ocean, though the coastline is short and development is more limited than on the Caribbean side. As for climate, Honduras is generally tropical, but it varies significantly depending on altitude and geography. Along the coastlines, the weather is hot and humid year-round, with average temperatures often between 25 and 30 degrees Celsius, or roughly 77 to 86 degrees Fahrenheit. In the interior highlands, the climate is milder. Days are warm, but nights can be cool, especially in higher elevations. This variation makes it possible to grow a wide range of crops, from sugarcane and bananas in the lowlands to coffee and vegetables in the cooler uplands. The country has two main seasons, the rainy season and the dry season. The rainy season typically runs from May to November, with heavy downpours, thunderstorms, and increased humidity. The dry season, from December to April, brings clearer skies and less precipitation, though some regions remain damp or cloudy year-round. Honduras is also exposed to tropical storms and hurricanes, especially on its Caribbean side. While not every year brings major storms, the country lies within the hurricane belt, and in the past it has been hit hard. In 1998, Hurricane Mitch devastated large parts of the country, causing landslides, flooding, and the loss of thousands of lives. The long recovery from that disaster continues to shape Honduran infrastructure and planning. Water is abundant in many areas, with rivers flowing down from the central mountains toward both coasts. But deforestation, soil erosion, and poor land management have led to flooding and environmental degradation in some regions. In others, particularly the south, droughts are an increasing problem, affecting crops and access to clean water. So, the geography and climate of Honduras are not extreme, but they are varied and deeply influential. The mountains bring isolation, the coasts bring connection. The rains bring life, but sometimes destruction. And through it all, the land quietly shapes how people live, where they build their homes, what they plant, what they eat, and how they prepare for each season. Economy, lifestyle, and settlement. In Honduras today, life is shaped by geography, history, and economy. The country is still largely rural, but increasingly urban. Many people live in small towns and farming communities, yet cities are growing steadily, drawing families in search of work, services, and opportunity. Let's begin with how people earn a living. Agriculture remains central to the Honduran economy, especially outside the cities. Across the highlands and valleys, you'll find small farms cultivating maize, beans, coffee, bananas, and vegetables. Coffee, in particular, is a key export. It grows best in the cooler elevations of the central and western mountains, where mornings are misty and the soil is rich. For many families, coffee is not just a product, it's a way of life, tied to seasonal rhythms and quiet labor on terraced hillsides. In the northern lowlands and coastal plains, the landscape changes. Here, larger farms, sometimes called fincas, produce bananas, sugarcane, and African palm for both domestic use and export. Some of these plantations date back to the era of foreign fruit companies, and while ownership has shifted over time, the structure of large-scale agriculture remains. Fishing is also an important industry, especially along the Pacific coast and around the Bay Islands. Shrimp farms and seafood exports contribute to the national economy, though the sustainability of these industries varies. Beyond agriculture, manufacturing and assembly work, known locally as maquilas, play a growing role. In industrial zones, particularly near San Pedro Sula, factories produce clothing, textiles, electronics, and auto parts, often for export to North America. These maquilas provide jobs, especially for women, but wages are generally low, and working conditions are sometimes precarious. Still, for many families, this sector offers a path to modest stability. The service sector is expanding, particularly in cities. Jobs in retail, hospitality, education, transportation, and administration now account for a significant share of employment. But the informal economy, unregulated, untaxed, and often invisible, is also widespread. Many people sell goods in markets, drive mototaxis, or do seasonal labor to make ends meet. And then there are the remittances, money sent home by Hondurans living abroad, mainly in the United States. These transfers account for more than 1/5 of the national GDP, making them one of the country's most vital sources of income. For many households, remittances pay for food, school supplies, home repairs, or medical care. Entire neighborhoods have been built with money earned abroad. While remittances provide short-term relief, they also reflect long-term challenges. when leaving the country becomes a survival strategy. As for where people live, around half of the population is now considered urban, though the boundary between rural and urban is not always sharp. The largest cities, like Tegucigalpa and San Pedro Sula, are surrounded by sprawling suburbs and informal settlements where new arrivals gradually build homes, often without full access to services like water, sewage, or electricity. These cities are crowded, lively, and noisy. Streets are filled with buses, motorcycles, vendors, and pedestrians. Shopping malls stand next to open-air markets. Security guards are a common sight. Life moves fast in the cities, but opportunities can be hard to find, especially for young people. Meanwhile, rural areas remain home to many Hondurans. Life there is slower and more predictable, but often marked by poverty and limited access to healthcare, education, and employment. Many small villages are only reachable by unpaved roads or footpaths. Community life is strong, but services are scarce. In some mountain regions, children walk long distances to reach school, and health clinics may be several hours away. In terms of regional differences, the Northwest is more industrialized, centered around San Pedro Sula and the Sula Valley. The Central Highlands, where Tegucigalpa is located, are more administrative and political. The East, known as La Mosquitia, is remote, forested, and sparsely populated. Here, indigenous communities live along rivers and lagoons, often relying on fishing, subsistence farming, and limited trade. The South, near the Pacific coast, is warmer, drier, and more agricultural, though also affected by drought. So, Honduras today is a country of contrasts. Wealth and poverty exist side by side. Formal and informal economies overlap. Mountain villages and factory towns coexist. Some people leave, others return. And through it all, daily life continues, quietly shaped by land, labor, and the long shadow of history. Culture and everyday life. The culture of Honduras is, like its geography, layered and diverse. It is a blend of indigenous heritage, Spanish colonial influences, Afro-Caribbean traditions, and modern global trends. Some parts of the country feel deeply rooted in old customs, while others are rapidly changing, shaped by migration, media, and the pace of urban life. At the heart of daily culture is family. Family ties are strong, and extended families often live close together or maintain frequent contact, even when separated by borders. Grandparents, aunts, cousins, and godparents are all part of the fabric of everyday life. In many homes, multiple generations live under one roof, sharing resources and responsibilities. Decisions are often made collectively, and family celebrations, birthdays, baptisms, and weddings are major events. Religion also plays a prominent role. While Catholicism has long been dominant, the growth of evangelical Christianity in recent decades has reshaped spiritual life in many communities. Churches, whether Catholic or evangelical, are central meeting places, and Sunday is still widely observed as a day of worship and rest. Religious festivals like Semana Santa, Holy Week, are marked by processions, rituals, and public gatherings, especially in more traditional towns. Music is everywhere. From the Caribbean rhythms of punta, a genre developed by the Garífuna people, to the ranchera songs heard on long bus rides through the mountains, to the reggaeton and pop music blaring from neighborhood stores, sound is part of the social atmosphere. Instruments like drums, guitars, and marimbas are used in traditional music, while urban youth might favor Bluetooth speakers and dance tracks shared over smartphones. Food is simple, filling, and comforting. The basic plate, called a plato típico, usually includes beans, rice, eggs, cheese, fried plantains, and tortillas. In rural areas, meals are made from what is grown or raised nearby. In cities, fast food chains and fried chicken restaurants are increasingly common. Tamales bailadas, flour tortillas with beans, cheese, and cream, and pastelitos, fried turnovers, are popular snacks. In coastal areas, seafood and coconut-based dishes reflect Afro-Caribbean culinary influences. Markets are still important, especially in smaller towns. Here, vendors sell fruit, vegetables, dried goods, and household items. Bargaining is common. In some places, traditional crafts are sold: wood carvings, woven textiles, and ceramics that reflect indigenous motifs or local pride. Clothes vary by region and occasion, but jeans and t-shirts are common everyday wear. School uniforms are required in most schools and are often carefully ironed and kept clean, even in poor areas. Education is free and compulsory until age 12, though attendance may be inconsistent in remote or poor areas. Public schools face challenges: shortages of teachers, textbooks, and classroom space, but education remains highly valued. Many families make sacrifices to keep their children in school, and some seek private schooling if they can afford it. Language is another layer of identity. Spanish is the dominant language, but regional dialects, slang, and indigenous languages add texture. In Garífuna and Mosquitia communities, bilingualism is common, mixing Spanish with local tongues. English is spoken more often on the Bay Islands, where historical British presence left its mark. Cultural identity also varies across regions. The Garífuna people along the northern coast have their own language, music, dance, and spiritual practices, which are now recognized as part of UNESCO's cultural heritage. In the Mosquitia region, indigenous groups live closer to nature, with cultural systems shaped by forest life, river travel, and community autonomy. In the Central Highlands, older Catholic traditions and Spanish influences remain strong, while the northwestern cities are more modern, industrial, and international in tone. Migration has also shaped culture. Many Hondurans have family members abroad, especially in the United States, and ideas, money, and habits flow back and forth. It is not uncommon to see homes with U.S. flags, kids wearing American sports jerseys, or holiday decorations that mix local and imported traditions. At the same time, people hold on to national identity with pride. The blue and white flag, the image of Lempira, the national anthem sung in schools, all are part of the shared story. So, the culture of Honduras is not static. It breathes and shifts with the times. It is rural and urban, traditional and changing, deeply personal and widely shared. It speaks in Spanish and Garífuna, in music and silence, in beans on a plate and prayers whispered at night. And through it all, life continues, sometimes hard, sometimes joyful, but always rooted in a place people call home. Safety, prices, and visas. When people think about traveling to Honduras, one of the first questions they tend to ask is it safe? And the answer, as with many things, is it depends. Honduras has a reputation for high levels of crime and violence, and this reputation is not without basis. For much of the past 2 decades, the country has struggled with organized crime, gang activity, and a high homicide rate. Cities like San Pedro Sula and Tegucigalpa have been particularly affected. Issues such as extortion, armed robbery, and carjacking have occurred, especially in urban areas and certain neighborhoods that are considered high risk. That said, the situation is not the same everywhere. Many of the more rural areas, tourist destinations, and coastal towns experience far less violence. Places like Roatan and the Bay Islands, for example, are known for their relatively calm atmosphere and are regularly visited by international tourists and cruise ships. The same goes for parts of La Ceiba, some nature parks, and archaeological sites like Copán ruinas. Most travelers who stick to well-known routes, use common sense, and avoid certain areas, especially at night, experience no problems. Like in many countries, risk is not evenly distributed. It is often a matter of where you go, when you go, and how you carry yourself. Hiring local guides, traveling during daylight, avoiding displays of wealth, and staying informed through local contacts or travel advisories are sensible steps. As for prices, Honduras is generally considered affordable by international standards. Meals at local eateries can cost just a few dollars, and even restaurant meals in tourist areas are relatively inexpensive. Public transport, such as buses and colectivos, is very cheap, though informal and sometimes chaotic. Taxis are also affordable, especially if you agree on a fare in advance. Accommodation varies by location. In rural areas, lodging can be very basic. Think small guest houses or family-run hostels. In cities and tourist zones, you'll find a wider range, from low-budget hostels to mid-range hotels and a few resorts. Roatan, in particular, has seen the development of more upscale options, especially for divers and beachgoers. Currency-wise, the Honduran lempira is the official currency. However, U.S. dollars are widely accepted in tourist areas, especially on the islands. At the time of this episode, $1 US equals roughly 24 to 25 lempiras, though this fluctuates with the market. ATMs are common in cities but may be scarce in rural zones, and it's wise to carry some cash, especially for small purchases. As for visas, many travelers, particularly from North America, Europe, and several other regions, do not need a visa to enter Honduras for stays of up to 90 days. Entry requirements can vary, so it's always best to check with the nearest Honduran consulate or an official government website before traveling. Upon arrival, visitors typically receive a tourist permit stamped into their passport. Overstaying this period can lead to fines or travel delays, so it's good to keep track of your time. Travelers may be asked to show proof of onward travel, such as a return ticket, and in some cases proof of sufficient funds. Requirements can change, especially in response to health or security concerns, so up-to-date information is important. If traveling by land from neighboring countries, border crossings are common and generally straightforward, though occasional delays or bureaucracy may occur. So, is it safe? Is it expensive? Do you need a visa? It depends, but for most visitors, the answer is, you can go, it won't cost much, and you probably don't need one. Just be mindful. Stay aware. And travel with curiosity, but also caution. In a place like Honduras, that combination tends to serve people well. Seasons and routes. If you're thinking about traveling to Honduras, it helps to know not just where to go, but also when and how. Let's begin with the seasons. Honduras has a tropical climate, which means that temperatures stay fairly warm year-round, especially along the coasts. But the most important difference isn't between summer and winter. It's between dry season and rainy season. The dry season typically runs from December to April. This is the most popular time to visit, especially for tourists heading to the Bay Islands for diving or to the mountains for hiking. The skies are usually clearer, the roads are in better condition, and outdoor activities are more predictable. Temperatures are warm, but not unbearable, especially in the highlands, where cool breezes make for pleasant mornings and evenings. The rainy season lasts from May to November and brings heavier rainfall, especially in the afternoons and evenings. In some areas, the rain is gentle and rhythmic. In others, it comes as sudden downpours that can flood roads and limit travel. The rain also brings lush green landscapes and fewer tourists. For those who don't mind getting wet, the rainy season can be peaceful and beautiful, but travel delays are more likely. Hurricane season overlaps with the rainy season, from June to November, and while hurricanes are not frequent, they do occasionally hit, particularly on the Caribbean side. Some years pass with little more than heavy rain. Other years, like during Hurricane Mitch in 1998, leave a deeper impact. It's worth checking weather forecasts if you're traveling during this period. Now let's talk about how to get there. Most international visitors arrive by air. Honduras has several international airports, the busiest being Ramon Villeda Morales International Airport in San Pedro Sula and Toncontín International Airport in Tegucigalpa. Another option is the Pomarola International Airport near Comayagua, which now handles more international traffic and has become an increasingly popular alternative to the older, mountain-ringed airport in Tegucigalpa. If you're headed for the Bay Islands, particularly Roatan or Utila, you can fly directly to Juan Manuel Galvez International Airport on Roatan from cities like Miami, Houston, or Atlanta. There are also ferries from the mainland, especially from La Ceiba, which is the jumping-off point for travelers going to the islands by sea. From Europe, there are fewer direct flights. Most travelers connect through the United States or Mexico. Travel from Canada usually involves a stopover in the U.S. as well. For those already in Central America, bus routes link Honduras to Guatemala, El Salvador, and Nicaragua, though road conditions and border wait times can vary. Inside the country, travel is usually by bus, private vehicle, or domestic flight. Long-distance buses connect major cities and are generally safe and inexpensive, though some routes are slow and bumpy. Within cities, taxis and mototaxis are common, and in rural areas, transport often involves pickup trucks, riverboats, or just walking. So when should you go? For dry weather and ease of travel, January through March are good choices. For fewer tourists and lower prices, May or June might suit you. If you're a diver, visibility is best during the drier months, though the sea can be calm at other times too. And how do you get there? Probably by plane with a layover, followed by a bus or ferry depending on where you're going. It's not difficult, but it does take planning. Flights can be irregular, and weather can play tricks, so flexibility is key. In short, getting to Honduras is possible, affordable, and increasingly common. But timing matters. Dry season makes life easier. Rain brings beauty, and sometimes trouble. The Bay Islands sparkle in the sun, while the mountains offer a cool escape. There's a time for everything. You just have to choose the right moment. Places to visit and things to do. Honduras may not be as widely known as some of its neighbors when it comes to tourism, but for those who do go, the country offers a quiet variety of landscapes, activities, and experiences without the crowds. Let's begin with perhaps the most popular and accessible destination for international travelers, the Bay Islands. Located in the Caribbean Sea, just off the northern coast, the Bay Islands, Roatan, Utila, and Guanaja, are known for their coral reefs, warm turquoise waters, and relaxed island atmosphere. Roatan is the largest and most developed, with sandy beaches, small resorts, and world-class diving. The island is part of the Mesoamerican Barrier Reef, the second largest in the world, and attracts divers from around the globe. Whether you're a beginner or experienced, the coral walls, shipwrecks, and abundant sea life make it a memorable destination. Utila is smaller, cheaper, and more laid-back, popular among backpackers and budget travelers. It's one of the most affordable places in the world to get certified as a scuba diver. Guanaja is the least visited of the three, and also the most tranquil. It's covered in forest and has fewer roads, offering a quieter, more remote experience. Back on the mainland, the Copán ruins in western Honduras are the country's most famous archaeological site. This ancient Maya city is a UNESCO World Heritage Site and one of the most important centers of classic Maya civilization. It features intricately carved stele, ceremonial plazas, and a famous hieroglyphic stairway, a monumental staircase inscribed with hundreds of glyphs. The site is peaceful, often uncrowded, and surrounded by gentle hills and coffee farms. Nearby, the small town of Copán Ruinas offers charming cobbled streets, goose houses, and cafes for visitors wanting to linger. For those drawn to nature, Pico Bonito National Park near La Ceiba provides hiking trails, waterfalls, and birdwatching in a lush tropical rainforest. The park rises from sea level up into cloud forest and is home to jaguars, toucans, and howler monkeys. Though sightings of large animals are rare, the forest itself is the main attraction. Eco-lodges offer access to the park's edges, and local guides can take you to swimming holes and lookout points. The Cusco Cloud Forest, near San Pedro Sula, is another protected area of misty trees, orchids, and frogs. Less visited than other parks, it's ideal for travelers seeking quiet hikes and biological diversity. If you prefer water to land, Lake Yojoa is the largest natural lake in the country. It sits in a volcanic depression and is surrounded by mountains. The area is good for fishing, boat rides, and bird watching, with over 400 species recorded. It's a peaceful place, with fish restaurants along the shore and nearby caves and waterfalls to explore. For beachgoers staying on the mainland, the northern coast has long stretches of coastline. Tila and La Ceiba offer access to beaches, as well as Garífuna villages where visitors can experience Afro-Caribbean culture, traditional drumming, and seafood stews rich with coconut and spice. Some of these villages also organize homestays and cultural performances. For the more adventurous, the La Mosquitia region in the east offers remote travel into rainforests and river systems. This is not typical tourism. Reaching this area involves small boats, long distances, and few amenities, but it is home to indigenous communities, dense jungle, and what some have called the last great wilderness of Central America. Expeditions into La Mosquitia are best done with experienced guides and a willingness to travel slowly. In the south, near Choluteca and the Gulf of Fonseca, the landscape shifts, hotter, flatter, and drier. It's not a major tourist hub, but the area has fishing villages, coastal mangroves, and boat trips to volcanic islands shared with El Salvador and Nicaragua. And of course, in any region, food is part of the journey. You can try bailadas, a simple but beloved Honduran dish consisting of a thick flour tortilla filled with refried beans, cream, cheese, and sometimes egg, avocado, or meat. Tamales, fried fish, cassava, and plantains are common in coastal and rural areas. In Garífuna communities, you might find machuca, a dish of mashed plantain with coconut milk soup and fish. And for those with a sweet tooth, desserts like tres leches cake or rosquillas, little corn cookies, are worth sampling. So what is there to see in Honduras? Ancient temples, coral reefs, misty forests, quiet lakes, small towns, simple food, palm trees, market stalls, roosters, rain, music, and space to breathe, to wander, and to see a country not built for crowds, but for quiet discovery. Fun facts, famous faces in football. Let's begin with a few fun facts about Honduras. Not necessarily because they are important, but simply because they are curious, and sometimes curiosity is enough. Honduras is home to a biological mystery called the rain of fish. In the department of Yoro, people claim that once or twice a year, usually after heavy rainstorms, fish fall from the sky. Locals gather them from puddles and fields. Scientists believe the fish may come from underground streams or be carried by floodwaters, but the exact mechanism is unclear. Whether meteorological or mythological, the phenomenon is celebrated in the Festival de la Lluvia de Peces, or Festival of the Rain of Fish. Honduras also claims to be the site of the legendary White City, or Ciudad Blanca, a lost city said to lie hidden in the jungle of La Mosquitia. Explorers, archaeologists, and adventurers have searched for it for over a century. In recent years, aerial surveys have detected possible ruins in the dense forest, but excavation is difficult due to remoteness and conservation concerns. Whether it's an actual city or a symbol, the legend remains. Now on to famous people. Honduras has produced several individuals known beyond its borders, particularly in sports and politics. One of the most internationally recognized is Carlos Pavón, a footballer who played for the national team and clubs in Mexico, Spain, and the US. He remains a national icon, especially for his role in helping Honduras qualify for the 2010 FIFA World Cup. In the world of music, Guillermo Anderson was a beloved singer-songwriter known for his poetic lyrics about Honduran landscapes and life. He sang in Spanish and Garífuna and blended folk with Caribbean rhythms. Though he passed away in 2016, his songs are still played on the radio and at cultural events. In politics, Xiomara Castro, the current president, made history as the first woman to lead the country. Her rise to office marked a return for the political movement that had been removed in the 2009 coup. Her presidency is still young, but symbolically significant. Another name that comes up internationally is David Suazo, a footballer who played in Italy for teams like Cagliari and Inter Milan. Known for his speed and power, Suazo is considered one of Honduras' most successful athletes abroad. In terms of inventions, Honduras is not particularly known for groundbreaking technological innovations. But in agriculture and craft, it has developed local traditions, such as the production of Lenca pottery, woven textiles, and cigars made in the western hills near the Nicaraguan border. And then there's football, or football, as it's called here. Football is by far the most popular sport in Honduras. Kids play it barefoot in dirt fields and city streets. Clubs like Olimpia, Motagua, and Real España draw passionate fans. The national team, La H, has qualified for the FIFA World Cup 3 times. In 1982, 2010, and 2014. Though they've never advanced beyond the group stage, qualifying itself is a source of immense national pride. Matches against rivals, especially El Salvador, can be intense. In fact, the 1969 football war between the two countries, though rooted in deeper political issues, was sparked in part by tensions during World Cup qualifying games. The conflict lasted only a few days, but the name has stuck, a reminder of how closely tied sports and identity can be. Other sports, like basketball and baseball, are played, but none come close to the cultural weight of football. When the national team plays, people gather around radios, televisions, and now phones to follow the game, hoping always for a goal. So in the end, what fun things can we say about Honduras? Fish might fall from the sky. Lost cities might sleep under the trees. Football is everything. And somewhere in the hills, a radio still plays a song by Guillermo Anderson as the sun sets behind the mountains. And that brings us quietly to the end of our slow and steady journey through Honduras. We've looked at where it is, what it's called, and how its rivers flow. We've talked about ancient cities hidden in the jungle and about long days spent harvesting coffee on misty hillsides. We've followed the threads of history, from Lempira's final stand to the modern-day presidency. We've touched on rainforests and reef fish, on protests and parades, and on a national love of football that unites people from coast to capital. And still, we've only just begun to understand. Because like most countries, Honduras is not a single story. It's many, told in many voices. Some of them loud, but most of them quiet. Maybe, somewhere along the way, you drifted off to sleep. That's okay. That's part of the idea. And if you're still here listening, we thank you for taking the time to travel slowly. If you enjoyed this episode, you can follow Boring Travel and Geography for Sleep for more episodes like this one. We're working our way, patiently, through every country in the world. No rush, no drama, just gentle information, delivered one nation at a time. Next time, we'll be visiting another country you may or may not have thought about recently. Until then, rest well, travel gently, and good night from Honduras.